In this video, we'll show how to do the questions in Module 1 of the math portion of the SAT practice test number 8, published by the College Board. You can find questions in this video by finding the practice test online. The practice test is published by the College Board. You can search College Board SAT practice test in an internet browser or go directly to the website you see on this screen. A link to the website is in the description of this video as well. I'll also link a PDF of the practice test in the description of this video. If you go to that website, this test is in Bundle 8. You'll click on that. The test is right here. And then you can also see how to score your test and an answers explanation. Some of the written explanations will be slightly different or maybe very different than the explanations that I show in this video. Once you download practice test number 8, then you'll get this. It starts out with some reading and writing modules, and then it has the math modules. When you get to page 30, the math modules start. It starts with some formula sheets and formulas and facts. And then the second page describes how to format the answers. And then on page 32, the actual questions start. So this is module 1. I'll show you how to do these questions as I would do them. Again, some of the explanations through the College Board website may be slightly different. So let's start on practice test 8, module 1 of the math portion of the SAT practice exam. Question 1. A bus is traveling at a constant speed along a straight portion of the road. The equation d equals 30t gives the distance d in feet from a road marker that the bus will be t seconds after passing the marker. How many feet from the marker will the bus be 2 seconds after passing that marker? So all we have to do is plug in 2 into t. That will indicate 2 seconds after we pass the marker. Doing that multiplication gives you 60. And so the answer is 60. In other words, the bus will be 60 feet from the marker after 2 seconds. And so that is answer C. So C, 60, is the answer to question number 1. Question 2. For a particular machine that produces beads, 29 out of every 100 beads it produces has a defect. A bead produced by the machine will be selected at random. What is the probability of selecting a bead that has a defect? So the probability of having a defect can be calculated by taking classical probability. So the number of beads with a defect divided by the total number of beads. So that would be 29 out of 100 as the probability of having a defect. That's obviously answer C. So the answer to question 2 is C, 29 out of 100. Question 3. What is the y-intercept of the graph shown? The y-intercept is where my curve hits the y-axis. This one is just a visual. We can see that it is 0 in the x direction and up 8 units in the y direction. So that's the y-axis. The y-intercept is where my graph hits the y-axis. So the y-intercept is 0, 8. That's option D. Therefore, the answer to question 3 is D, 0, 8. Question 4. Which expression is equivalent to the following expression? Basically, what this is asking us to do is to combine like terms. We're adding a polynomial to a polynomial. And when we add polynomials together, we combine like terms. So I'm going to take 2x squared plus x squared. That's going to give me 3 copies of x squared. X plus 6x gives me plus 7x. Negative 9 and a positive 1 combine to give me a minus 8. So we end up with 3x squared plus 7x minus 8. Again, I get that by combining like terms. And that is answer D. So D is the answer to question 4. Question 5. An analyst collected data on the price of a carton of grape tomatoes at 30 locations selected at random in Utah. The mean price of a carton of grape tomatoes in Utah was estimated to be $4.23, with an associated margin of error of 8 cents. Which of the following is a plausible statement about the mean price of a carton of grape tomatoes for all locations that sell this product in Utah? So basically what we're going to do is that the sample average was $4.23. And that means that the average for the population should be pretty close to that. How close depends on the margin of error. So we would take $4.23 and then subtract 8 cents. That would be kind of our low bound estimate for the average. And $4.23 and add 8 cents. That would be our high bound for the estimate of the average. You can use less than or equal to or just less than signs if you'd like. So basically, what we're saying is that the average price should be somewhere between $4.15 and $4.31. And that means the answer to question 5 is A. The average price should be between $4.15 and $4.31. So A is the answer to question 5. Question 6. What value of x is the solution to the given equation? All we're going to do is take this equation, 2.6 plus x is equal to 2.8, and I would subtract 2.6 from both sides. When you subtract 2.6 from the left, you just get x. When you subtract 2.6 from the right, you get 0.2 or 0.2. If you wanted to write that as a fraction, you could. 0.2 is 1/5 as a fraction. Either way is perfectly fine. So 0.2 is the answer to question 6. Question 7. Out of 300 seeds that were planted, 80% sprouted. How many of the seeds sprouted? Well, if 80% sprouted, 80% of 300 is 0.80 times 300. When you do that multiplication, you get 240. So that means 240 seeds sprouted. And the answer to the question 7 is 240. Question 8. For the linear function f, b is a constant and f of 7 is equal to 28. What is the value of b? Since we know that f of 7 is equal to 28, and we know f of x is equal to 4x plus b, we can plug in 7 into that function, 4 times 7 plus b. And now since my output I know is 28, I can say, well, f of 7 can be replaced with a 28. So I get this equation, 28 is equal to 4 times 7 plus b. That means 28 is equal to 28 plus b, which means b has to be 0 when I subtract 28 from both sides. So b is 0, and that option is option A. So option A is the correct option, or the answer to question number 8. Here we go. Question 9. Right triangles LMN and PQR are similar, where L and M correspond to P and Q respectively. Angle M has a measure of 53 degrees. What is the measure of angle Q? So when it says L and M correspond to P and Q respectively, and we know that these are similar triangles, that tells me L is the same angle as P, and also M is the same angle as Q, because similar triangles have the same angles. Now, really the only one we need to use is that M is equal to Q, because if M is equal to 53 degrees and Q is equal to M, then Q is equal to 53 degrees, and that's what we're trying to find. So the answer to question 9 is B, 53 degrees. Now, if you wanted to, you could also draw a picture. We don't know where the L and the P sit over here, or the L and the N sit in the left-hand triangle. We don't know where the P and the Q, or the P and the R sit in the right-hand triangle, which one's the 90 degrees and which one's the other. But since M and Q correspond, that means they need to have the same angle measurement. So if M is 53 degrees, then Q is 53 degrees, and then we're done. Q is 53 degrees. So question 9, if you want to draw a picture, you can. If you know what similar triangles mean, you can do it without drawing a picture. I tend to like drawing the picture when I have the opportunity. So B is the answer to question 9. Question 10. What is the equation of the line that passes through point 0.05 and is parallel to the graph of y equals 7x plus 4? Now, slope-intercept form of a line is y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y value of the y-intercept. Now, if I want my slope, if I want my line to be parallel to y equals 7x plus 4, notice that in this given line, the slope is 7. Therefore, in my line, I need the slope to be 7 as well, because parallel lines have the same slope. So parallel lines means we have the same slope. And now what we can do is we can realize that our equation for the line is going to look like y equals 7x plus some number, which we'll label as b. Since it goes through the point 0,5, you may recognize 0,5 is the y-intercept, making b to be 5. If you don't see that, then just plug in 0,5. 5 is the y value, 0 is the x value, and either way you see that the 5 has to be the value of b. So the line that we're looking at is y equals 7x plus 5. And that means B is your answer to question 10. Y equals 7x plus 5 is the answer to question 10. Question 11. Which of the following equations is the most appropriate linear model for the data shown in this scatter plot? So I look at this scatter plot and I should recognize that we have a negative slope. As we move left to right, generally these dots are moving down. So we have a negative slope, and this line appears to be crossing close to 0, 10-ish. So if I just look at those two things, the only line that matches y equals, I need to have a negative slope. So we gotta have mx plus b. I'm saying m needs to be negative. The only option for that is the negative 1.9. So m is going to be negative 1.9. Let me just replace that m with a negative 1.9. And then plus b. B is going to be, again, up here at like a positive 10-ish. And the one value that has a positive y value for the y-intercept is I need to make it that be a positive 10.1. So y equals negative 1.9x plus 10.1 is the answer. And that is option B. So option B is the one with a negative slope and a positive y-intercept. Question 12. A model predicts that the population of Bergen was 15,000 in 2005. The model also predicts that each year for the next 5 years, the population P increased by 4% of the previous year's population. Which equation best represents this model where X is the number of years after 2005? So X is years after 2005. An increase by 4% means repeated multiplication by 104%, which as a decimal would be 1.04. So we're going to multiply by 1.04 over and over and over again. And we're going to have an initial value of 15,000, an initial population of 15,000. So that means my model should be that the population starts out at 15,000. And then we multiply 1.04 for each year past the year 2005. And that's my X value. So 15,000 times 1.04 raised to the X power. That's option D, as in dog. So population is modeled by option D. Question 13. The solution to the given system of equations is A comma B. What is the value of B? We have two equations here. 2A plus 8B equals 198. And then 2A plus 4B is equal to 98. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the elimination method. 2A plus 8b is equal to 198. And in order to use the elimination method, we need opposite coefficients. So I'm going to multiply that second equation on the left and the right by a -1. That's going to give me negative 2a minus 4b is equal to negative 98. That's what I get when I multiply both sides by -1. Now I can add these two up. When I add these two equations, the left hand combined is going to combine to give me 0a plus 4b. So 8b minus 4b is 4b. 2a minus 2a is no a. And then that's going to be equal to 100 because 198 minus 98 is obviously 100. Solving for b would mean that I divide both sides by 4 and I get b equals 25. So this is the correct b value that's going to provide a solution in this system of linear equations. And that's actually all it asked me for. It only asked me for the b value, so I can stop right there. If it also asked me for the a value, I could plug that b value in to one of these two equations and solve for a. But it doesn't. It just asked me for the b value. So the value of b is 25. This says question 14 says the expression 90 y to the fifth minus 54 y to the fourth is equivalent to r times y to the fourth multiplied times 15y minus 9. Basically, we need to factor out a number and we need to be left with 15y minus 9 inside of parentheses. So I'm going to factor out a 6y to the fourth. If I do that, 90 divided by 6 is 15. Y to the fifth divided by y to the fourth is a y. Minus 54 divided by 6 would have been 9. Y to the fourth over y to the fourth is 1. So we end up with that factoring. 6y to the fourth times 15y minus 9. And so what we're saying here is that the r value, which is what we're asked to find, it has to be 6. So r value has to be 6, and that's the answer to question 14, 6. So that's question 14. Question 15. The graph of y equals f of x is shown where the function is defined by f of x is equal to ax to the third plus bx squared plus cx plus d. And a, b, c, and d are constants. For how many values of x does f of x is equal to 0? So this is a third degree polynomial function, which means that the number of times we can cross the x-axis is 3. Crossing the x-axis means that my output is 0. So then we look back to our equation here, or my graph, excuse me. How many times do we cross the x-axis? Well, we cross it there, which is about -1, there, which is about 4, and there, which is about 7. So since it crosses the x-axis 3 times, then we're going to have 3 different x values where we plug them in and we get out a 0. Therefore, 3 times is the answer to question 15. So C is the answer to question 15. Question 16. The area A in square centimeters of a rectangular cutting board can be represented by the expression W times W plus 9, where W is the width, in centimeters of the cutting board. Which expression represents the length in centimeters of the cutting board? Well, area is equal to length times width or width times length. It doesn't matter the order you put that in. We are told that the area is equal to width times W plus 9. So if we can't see it already, the L has to be the W plus 9. The reason for that is that if we set the areas equal, we have WL equal to W times W plus 9. And then if I divided both sides by W, those coefficients of W's would cancel out, and we'd be left with L equals W plus 9. So the answer to 16 is W plus 9, which is option D. So W plus 9, option D, is the answer to 16. Question 17. The given equation relates the distinct positive numbers P, K, and J. Which equation correctly expresses 4J plus 9 in terms of P and K? And then it gives us some options. Notice on all of our options, it's solving for 4J plus 9. Well, we can do that. We can solve for 4J plus 9. 4J plus 9 is the denominator of the right-hand side. There's a couple of different ways you can solve this. The way I like to do it is I like to multiply the right and the left-hand side by the denominator. So I'd go 4J plus 9 multiplied on the right-hand side, and then 4J plus 9 multiplied on the left-hand side. Once we do that, the denominator and the 4J plus 9 that we're multiplying by will cancel out on the right-hand side, and we'll be left with P times the quantity 4J plus 9 is equal to just K on the right-hand side. Dividing both sides by P, I would end up with just 4J plus 9 on the left equal to K divided by P on the right. So this is one way to do it. That's one option. If you'd rather, you can also take that equation that we were given and rewrite it by taking the reciprocal of the left and right-hand side. I can do that because they're distinct positive numbers. Everything turns out to be positive. If I took the reciprocal, I would end up with 1 over P on the left-hand side is equal to the reciprocal, which is 4J plus 9. Divided by K on the right-hand side. And then I could multiply both sides by K if I would like to. And multiplying both sides by K gives you 4J plus 9 on the right and K over P on the left. So there you go. That means that whichever way you do this, the answer is 4J plus 9 is equal to K over P. So that's answer A. Question 18. Circle A has radius 3n and circle B has radius 129n, where n is a positive constant. The area of circle B is how many times the area of circle A? So we're going to calculate the area of both of these. So start out with the area of circle A. Now this is a formula in the first page of module 1 on that formula section. Area of a circle is pi times the radius squared. So in our case, since the radius is 3n, we get pi times quantity 3n squared. Make sure you put the parentheses around the 3n because we need to square the 3 and square the n. That gives us 9n squared times pi as the area of circle A. The area of circle B, once again, is just pi times r squared. I'll use a different r there because it's a bigger r, but it doesn't matter notation. So the radius in this case is 129n. We're going to square that. When you square 129, you end up with 16,641. Squaring n gives you n squared. And then you have that pi along there. So if we want to know how many times bigger the area of circle B is than circle A, all we need to do is divide. How many times bigger? Well, that's going to be that 16,641 times n squared times pi divided by 9 times n squared times pi. The n squareds are going to cancel each other out. The pi's are going to cancel each other out. And I just have to take 16,641 and divide it by 9. I'll do that on a calculator. When I did that, I got 1849. So the area of B is 1,849 times bigger than the area of circle A. So that means that the correct answer is D, 1849. Thinking of area here. So D is the correct answer to question 18, 1,849. Option D. Question 19. The measure of angle R is 2 pi over 3 radians. The measure of angle T is 5 pi over 12 radians greater than the measure of angle R. So T is equal to the measure of angle R plus 5 pi over 12. And then it's asking, what is the measure of angle T in degrees? Well, before we do degrees, let's start with radians. So R is 2 pi over 3 radians. T is 5 pi over 12 more than that. When you combine those two, 2 pi over 3, multiply top and bottom by 4, that's the same thing as 8 pi over 12 if you want to do this by hand. That gives you 13 pi over 12. So that's what you get when you add 2 pi over 3 to 5 pi over 12. You get 13 pi over 12. Now this is going to be in radians. So if I want to convert from degrees to radians, what I have to do is take that 13 pi over 12. That's in radians. And I like to think of this as multiplying by 1. So I need to multiply by 1. I need to cancel out the radians. So I start with radians in the denominator. And I'll have degrees in the numerator. Now, on that formula sheet at the beginning, it said that 2 pi radians is the same as 360 degrees. But if you use 360 and 2 pi That'll work out just fine. Radians will cancel out, you get degrees. But more people than not say, well, if 360 is 2 pi, then 180 is 1 pi. 180 degrees is pi radians. Again, I'm getting that 360 is 2 pi from the formula sheet at the beginning of module 1. But at this point, all I have to do is multiply 13 pi over 12 times 180 over pi. The pi's are going to cancel out. You'll have 13 over 12 times 180, which happens to be 195 degrees. So the answer to question 19 is C, 195 degrees. Question 20. The given equation relates the variables x and y. For what value of x does the value of y reach its minimum? Now, the best way to do this is to immediately recognize that this equation is a parabola. And because we have a positive coefficient on my x squared term, it's an implied 1, that's a parabola that's going to be pointing up. So the minimum value for this parabola is going to happen at the vertex of this parabola. We know that the vertex has an x value, which is opposite of b over 2a. In this case, the b is a negative 14. So we're taking the opposite of negative 14 divided by 2 times a, or 2 times 1. That's going to give me 14 over 2, which is 7. So that's the x value of the vertex, and the vertex is the minimum point. So that's all it's asking you to do. For what value of x does the value of y reach its minimum? Well, x equals 7 is the value of x, where the corresponding y value is at a minimum. So x equals 7 is the answer to question 20. (21) A small business owner budgets $2,200 to purchase candles. The owner must purchase a minimum of 200 candles to maintain the discounted pricing. If the owner pays $4.90 per candle to purchase small candles and $11.60 per candle to purchase large candles, what is the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget and maintain the discounted pricing? So we have two things going on here. We have a budget and forcing us to maintain discounting pricing. And we have small and large candles. I'm going to call the number of small candles X. Sometimes people would call this S, but a lot of times if I'm writing this down on paper, S and 5s look similar. So small candles are going to be the X value. And then the Y value is obviously going to be the large candles, the number of large candles. The owner must purchase a minimum of 200 candles. So when I combine the X and the Y, they have to be at least 200 candles. So when I take the small and the large together, they have to be at least 200 candles. The other inequality is about pricing. When you take $4.90 times the X, you'll get the total price of the small candles, plus 1160 times Y, you'll get the 1160 Y is the total price of the large candles. But this business owner only has 2,200 to purchase the candles. So whatever we do has to come out less than or equal to 2,200. And so I have these two inequalities. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine these and put these together. And we can do these in a number of ways. The easiest way for me to see is always I'm going to solve for one of the variables. I'll choose X because we're talking about large candles. That's like the question is talking about large candles. So I'm going to solve for X. And in that first equation, or first inequality, I should say, to solve for X, we would subtract Y from both sides. We would get X is greater than or equal to 200 minus Y. And in the second equation, if I solve for X, I would take 490 times X less than or equal to 2200 minus 11.60 Y. And then I do a second step of dividing by 490. So divide all of this by 490, 4.90. Excuse me, that didn't take the way I wanted it to. There we go. So there we go. That's what we have. We have these two inequalities. Now we can put these together into one bigger inequality by saying X needs to be bigger than 200 minus Y. So 200 minus Y, X has to be bigger than that. But it also has to be less than or equal to this fraction of 2200 minus 1160Y divided by 490. Well, if 200 minus Y is less than or equal to X, and that's less than or equal to this, then what we know is that the left-hand side has to be less than or equal to this big right-hand side. So I'm going to eliminate the X and just think of this as 200 minus Y has to be less than or equal to 2200 minus 1160 Y divided by 4.90. Now I have an inequality that I can solve for Y, which remember was the amount of large candles. So we would multiply both sides by 490 or 4.9. So multiplying both sides by 4.9 gives me 980 minus 4.90y on the left-hand side. We maintain our direction of inequality because that's multiplying by a positive. We get 2,200 minus 11.60y. And now it's a matter of solving. I'm going to subtract 980 from both sides. When I do that, the sign doesn't change. 2,200 minus 980 becomes 1,220. And then I would add 11.6y to both sides. What that would do to the left-hand side would give me 6.7y. Dividing now both sides by 6.7 forces my y value to be less than or equal to 182.09. That's obviously the rough estimate. So that's the rounded version. Now we can't buy 0.09 of a candle. Therefore, when it asks us What's the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget and get the discounted pricing? Well, we can go up to 182, but we have to stay below that. If we go 183, we've gone up too far. My Y value has to be 182. And therefore, the answer to this question is 182 large candles. We can't buy 0.09 of a large candle. So we can purchase at most 182 large candles. And that's the answer to this question 21. The answer is 182. Question 22. Which point xy is a solution to the given system of inequalities in the xy plane? Now, we're just going to plug in these points and check them in the first and second equation, or not equation, but inequality. So what I'm going to do is let's start with the A here. When I plug in 14, 0 into this first inequality, I would end up with 0 for the y value is less than or equal to negative 14 plus 7. So I'm plugging in negative 14 in for the x plus 7. So that's 0 less than negative 7. Now that's obviously false, and therefore the point is not going to work in the system of linear equations. Now let's plug in 0, negative 14. I plug in 0 for x, negative 14 for y into that first inequality, and I would get negative 14 less than or equal to 0 plus 7. Let me rewrite that. That's negative 14 less than or equal to 7. That's true. That's good. And then I would try the other equation. Plug in 0, negative 14 into the second equation. When I do that, I would end up with negative 14 is greater than or equal to negative 2 times 0 minus 1. That's saying that negative 14 is greater than or equal to negative 1. That's false. And so the point in B, which is 0, negative 14, does not work. So we have A and B are points that don't work. Let's try 0, 14. Try that in the first equation. We'll get 14 for the y value, less than or equal to, when I plug in 0 for the x, that's going to be 0 plus 7, or just 7. 14 less than or equal to 7, that's false. So again, this point does not work either. I don't have to test the other. If one of the inequalities is false, then I don't have to test the other. And so lastly, let's try D, 14, 0. If you plug in 14, 0 into the first inequality, we get 0 less than or equal to 14 plus 7. 14 plus 7 is 21. So that's a true statement. And then if I do that for the second inequality, what we get is 0 greater than or equal to negative 2 multiplied times 14 minus 1. That's negative 28 minus 1, or negative 29 on the on the right hand side. And that's also true. So by plugging in these points into both inequalities, we see that the only point that works is the point in option D. So this point works, and therefore the answer to question number 22 is D, 14, 0 is the only one of those four given points that work. A lot of times when I do this, I'll do some of that in my head, and it goes pretty quick if you do that in your head. I know I wrote down all of these steps. But D is the answer to question 22. Question 23. The frequency table summarizes a data set of the weights, rounded to the nearest pound, of 71 tortoises. A weight of 39 pounds is added to the original data set, creating a new data set of weights rounded to the nearest pound of 72 tortoises. So basically we added one tortoise that weighed 39 pounds. Which statement best compares the mean and median of the new data set and the median of the mean and median of the original data set? Now, if you wanted to go ahead and calculate these, you could, but all we're doing is essentially adding an option of a 39-pound tortoise right here at the end with a frequency of 1. If you calculated where the mean was at, what you would do is you take 13 times 12 plus 14 times 8 plus 15 times 5 all the way up, and then in your original data set, you'd stop at 20 times 7. Now we've added this new tortoise who weighs 39 pounds. So the mean, since that weight of this tortoise that we found is 39 pounds, the average weight is going to be pulled up a little bit because you have to use the 39-pound tortoise when you calculate the average. So the mean is going to be higher, but it's not going to affect the median. Wherever the median happens to be, let's say the median, you can calculate where the median is at, but moving one or unit, unless it's on the very edge, is not going to change the median. So the median is going to stay the same while the average or mean is going to increase. So the mean increases from data set our original to our new data set, but the median stays the same. Again, you could have manually found the mean and the median for both our original data set and our new data set, but again, using logic, we know that the average increases while the median stays the same. So let's look for which option that is. So that's option B. The mean of the new data set is greater than the mean of the original data set, and the medians of the two data sets are equal. So option B is the option that is the answer to question 23. So question 23, B is our answer. Question 24. Which of the following are solutions to the given equation where A is a constant and A is greater than 30? And then it gives us some options. Now you might want to start by starting to plug in A and then plug in A plus 1 and plug in 29. But it's actually a little bit easier just to go ahead and solve this equation. I found it. just as easy to solve this equation. So let's take this equation. You could plug in those values and see which ones are true and which ones are not true. Okay. So there we go. So basically we have two options. First off, if x minus 29 is not equal to 0, then I can divide both sides by x minus 29. So in that case, what I would get on the left is an x minus 29 divided by an x minus 29. And on the right, if I divided by x minus 29, I would cancel out this common x minus 29. So I'd just be left with x minus a. But left would be 1 so long as x minus 29 is not equal to 0. We get 1 is equal to x minus a. And adding a to both sides would give me that a plus 1 is equal to x. So that's one option. So if x minus 29 is not 0, then a plus 1 works as a solution. On the other hand, what if x minus 29 is 0? Well, if x minus 29 is 0, then x has to be 29. And hopefully we can see that if we plug in 29, we get 29 minus 29. So 0 on the left-hand side. And then we get x minus a times another 29 minus 29, or 0, on the right-hand side. So we get 0 equals 0, which means that x equals 29 is a solution. So my two solutions are a plus 1 and 29. There's no other solutions because there's no other options for x. X could be, x minus 29 could be 0, or it could be not equal to 0. So that means option 2 and 3 are the ones that work. So options 2 and 3 work. And that is answer C. So answer C is the correct answer to this question 24. By the way, if you wanted to try to plug in A, you could plug in A, and what you would get, let me just do this for thorough sake, just to be thorough. On the left, you would get a minus 29. And on the right, you'd get 0, because you'd get a minus a, which is 0, times something, a minus 29. So you get 0 times a minus 29, which is just 0. And since a is greater than 30, this left-hand side is not 0. Therefore, a does not work. So like I said, you can either solve this manually, or you could plug in these values and see which ones give you a true statement. I like solving manually, but if you wanted to plug in all three of these values, you absolutely could do that. But in either case, we get C. Options 2 and 3 only work. Question 25. In the xy plane, the graph of equation y equals negative x squared plus 9x minus 100 intersects the line y equals c at exactly 1 point. What is the value of c? Once again, we have a parabola, a quadratic equation, which has the graph of a parabola. And because the coefficient of x squared is negative, we know that this parabola points down. It intersects the line y equals c at exactly 1 point. The only way we can have a horizontal line intersect our parabola at 1 point is if that point happens to be the vertex. So essentially we need to find the vertex, and the y value of the vertex will be the c. Let me write that down again. So the y value of the vertex is going to be the C. All right. So let's find the vertex. The vertex has X value, which is opposite of B over 2A. In this situation, the B term is coefficient on the X. So in this situation, it's 9. So that's negative 9 over 2 times negative 1. So I can either call that 9/2 or I can call that 4.5. It doesn't matter. And now we're going to find the y value of the vertex. The way I find the y value of the vertex is I just plug in the x value into my quadratic equation. So negative x squared becomes negative 9/2 squared, plus 9 times x becomes plus 9 times 9/2 minus 100. This is something I would plug into my calculator. My calculator would give me a negative 79.75, which I could, obviously my answers and my options are all in fraction form. So I can convert that to a fraction, multiply by 4 and see what we get. When in doubt, you end up with a negative 319 divided by 4, just converting that to a fraction. So we have an improper fraction of negative 319 over 4 as the y value of the vertex. And that means that value of c needs to be negative 319 over 4. So negative 319 over 4 is option C, and therefore option C, negative 319 over 4, is the answer to question 25. Question 26. The functions f and g are defined by the given equations where x is greater than or equal to 0. Which of the following equations displays as a constant or coefficient the maximum value of the function it defines where x is greater than or equal to 0? Basically what this is saying is we want our coefficient or our constant to be the biggest value, and then as we increase x, what biggest value when x is 0, and as we increase x, we want the function to be smaller than that. And so think about this. If I repeatedly multiply by 1.25 as x goes from 0 to 1 to 2, multiplying by 1.25 is going to make our value bigger. So multiplying by 1.25 grows the function output, right? But multiplying by 0.73 decreases the output, as long as we're talking about positive. All these numbers are positives. So multiplying by 0.75 decreases the output. If I want my constant to be the biggest value, then I want the output to be decreasing. And therefore, 2 only has it so that when I plug in an x of 0, it's the biggest value. That's the one where when we plug in x of 0, we get a 9, and you plug in any other x which is bigger than or equal to 0, and it gives you something smaller than 9. And you can test that out on your own if you'd like. You could also have graphed these two equations. On the other hand, 1, when you plug in an x of 0, you get 18 plus 41. And then as you increase x, you're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger numbers. And those bigger and bigger numbers are going to go off to infinity. We're going to have no maximum value for the function as x grows. So 2 only, which is option B, is the answer to question 26. So option B is the answer to question 26. Question 27. The perimeter of an equilateral triangle is 852 centimeters. The 3 vertices of the triangle lie on a circle. The radius of that circle is w times the square root of 3 centimeters. What is the value of w? Now here we have a geometry problem, and it's always nice to draw a picture. So I'm going to draw a picture, and I'm going to add in a couple of lines that we'll need in just a second. So I'll draw that picture and dump it into this Word document. So I've tried to do that here. I've got my best equilateral triangle inscribed in a circle so that the 3 vertices of the triangle lie on the circle. Now, since the perimeter of the equilateral triangle is 852, I can take that 852 and divide it by 3. Since it's equilateral, I know all 3 of these sides are going to be the same length. And that would be length 284, as I've already labeled in this problem. So I'm just dividing the 852 by 3 to get the side length of that. Now, the radius will be from one point all the way to the center of the circle. So the radius goes from one vertex to the center of the circle. We know that's w times square root of 3. Don't worry about that too much. Here's the other thing. Since the 3 angles of a triangle have to add to 180 degrees, that means each angle of an equilateral triangle is going to be 60 degrees. So it's 60 degrees, each angle of an equilateral triangle. Now look at this. The radius, since it goes straight from this point of the triangle straight down to the center, is going to bisect that angle. That means this angle A that I've labeled is actually a 30-degree angle. So A is a 30-degree angle. And because if we draw this line from the center perpendicular to the equilateral triangle, well, that's going to create a right angle. And because it's perpendicular, I'll split this in half. So basically, what I'm saying is I'm getting a right triangle. I could have done that with any of these sides. So if I bisect here, what I end up doing is seeing that not only do I have a right triangle here, but that means this angle B is going to be 60 degrees. And this side of my right triangle is going to be half of 284. So that's 142. So B is 60 degrees, A is 30 degrees, and I have this right triangle where one length is 142. Let me go ahead and draw that as well. Before I do that, I better say that B is 60 degrees. So I have this right triangle here, and this bottom length I'm saying is 142. I know that that bottom length is 142 because it's half the side of my equilateral triangle. So we have a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. And it turns out with the 30, 60, 90, that is one of the formulas that the SAT practice test gives us. Let's look at that formula. It says that if we have a 30, 60, 90 right triangle, that's the special right triangle here, then the leg next to the 30 degrees is going to be x times root 3. The leg opposite the 30 degrees next to the 60 degrees is going to be leg length x, and the hypotenuse is going to be 2x. So let's put that together. So I have these two pictures, all right? And what these two pictures tell me is that x times root 3 is 142. These are the ratios of the sides. So x times the square root of 3 is 142, which means that x is equal to 142 over a square root of 3. And then my hypotenuse, which is my r in this case, my radius r, is equal to 2x. So that means r has to be equal to 2 times 142 divided by the square root of 3. Or what's that? That is 284 divided by the square root of 3. So that's my r. Now be careful here. We're not asking for r. Remember, it says the radius of the circle is w times the square root of 3 centimeters. What is the value of w? So the radius will be replaced since the radius is equal to 284 divided by the square root of 3. That radius is going to be w times the square root of 3. To find w, all I have to do, well, I could do this a couple of different ways, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by square root of 3. W is equal to 284 divided by the square root of 3 times another square root of 3. By the way, the square root of 3 times another square root of 3 is just 3. Root 3 times root 3 is 3. So we get W is 284 divided by 3. And that's the final answer. 284 over 3 is what W has to be. So the answer to question 27 is 284 divided by 3. We got that by noticing that we could draw this right triangle where where this right triangle is a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So one of our special right triangles. That's the most straightforward way to do this one. There are other ways as well, I'm sure. That concludes Module 1 of the SAT Practice Test number 8. There is a link to an explanation of the solutions to Module 2 of this practice test in the description of this video. There's also a link to a playlist of other Module 1 and Module 2 SAT practice tests in the description of this video as well. So the math portions of these SAT practice tests is linked in a playlist in the description of this video as well. Lastly, if you are planning on taking the SAT soon, then good luck. I hope this video helped you.